Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how the heck are you? Let's see. It is mid-July right now. Is it hot where you're at? How do you feel about me talking about the weather? That's all I'm going to say. This episode with Jen is really interesting. We didn't really have a plan before we recorded, but we've had a lot going on and we just decided to hit record. We talk about a bunch of things: setting boundaries in relationships, rupture, repair, how it is setting boundaries, the dysregulation, how it can feel really nice when somebody skillfully sets a boundary with you, and our fear of setting boundaries, but how it really can create safety, how it is when people don't honor our boundaries. Friendships aren't always meant to last. How do we determine who our close friends are, who's in the middle circle, on the outside circle? We have friendships that go for certain seasons of our lives, and if you're going to have close, intimate relationships, chances are they're not always feeling warm and connected, that there's distance, there's conflict, there's rupture, there's repair, and just really normalizing this. I don't know. I think we did a pretty good job for not having a plan of where we were going to go. And the things that come up if you do set boundaries, the guilt, the euphoric recall. Is it okay? How do you see yourself in context with the relationship? So I think it's a pretty good episode. Curious to know what you think. These are things that my clients and folks in group are always talking about and working on, and it's not something that we really learn how to do. So I think the more that we hear about it and it's normalized, the easier it is, and the more it just feels like this is how it is. I think that's all I have to say. And now, on to the show. Hey, Jen. How are you?
Hi, my dear.
How's it going?
How is it going? Little calmer, I feel like I'm starting to land a little bit. I actually feel pretty good today.
Yeah?
Yeah. I've been nesting. I'm tired of feeling like I haven't quite moved in all the way yet into my new home. So that's been feeling good and kind of the fun part, not the hauling boxes part. But yeah, so that's been good. How about you?
I think I'm okay. Steve's out of town this week. When he went out of town in April, I was very productive and very social, and it felt great. And this time I've had some relationship ruptures and some things going on, which I'm fine with, but it's taken some of my energy. It's activated some of my friendship wounds I'm managing, but my energy is just much lower. And I've had my to-do list has gotten really big, and my ability to do things outside of what I normally do has really been diminished. And this morning, instead of paddling, I tackled some of the things on my to-do list, which feels really nice. Like there's still more stuff to do. But when you and I connected, you're like, how are you? It's like, I don't know. I've just been doing my stuff and I don't know how I am. So It's been a much more quiet, reflective, contemplative thing. And I've been thinking about when we talked last week about how when you talk about the existential, we're born alone, we die alone, and how that makes me angry when you say that. That's kind of what I've been sitting with this week, is being more present for myself, because I really do well with lots of connection. And that means Marco Polo with people and texting with people and having social things, not a ton, but just enough to kind of keep me connected. And I've had some beautiful connections this week, but just not scheduled and planned, and more alone time, and just trying to be okay with that.
Yeah. I think that's such a good exercise. I really do. I mean, I remember when my aloneness went from feeling so empty to feeling full. It's funny, I think last week was the first time, maybe you had said it before, but that I realized how much you hate that. And
it's the being alone part.
I feel like it's at least a third of what I talk about almost all the time. And you must really love me to put up with that.
I do love you. I think it triggers my attachment wounds and how much of my life I felt very lonely and disconnected. And knowing that connection is really important to me, and I require more connection than the average person. I think it's also part of how my brain is wired. That like when my son is here, he has music playing all the time, and that is hard on my nervous system. but I'm always watching short videos. My attention span tends to be pretty short, so I like lots of quick novel stimulation, and thinking about things, processing gives me that internal stimulation if I'm not getting the external stimulation. But sometimes just sitting with my thoughts or not having that connection doesn't take me to the greatest place in the world. And so there's a place of how do I sit with myself and feel that nurturing and not to get understimulated so it sends me into not taking care of myself, kind of that sweet spot.
Mm. Yeah. I'm just thinking the way life has been, I can't even trying to think of the last time I was understimulated.
Yeah. Well, you have more pieces in your life.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been having some good boundaries lately. Some of it's kind of rupture like, I guess. I don't know. When I use rupture, I always use repair right after. And this is hopefully there will be a repair at some point in the future, but it feels very distant.
Yeah.
And that's been interesting to create some emotional space and a way of taking care of myself. And again, it doesn't mean I don't love this person, right? Or that I still think about her all the time. But it's funny, those attachment wounds. And, when you said that, it made me think about kind of like how some people will contemplate death in order to really live. And to living in the light of death as a way to make life more vibrant. So I wonder if that's a little bit about what I'm doing with that loneliness.
Sure.
I'm going to chuckle like every time I think about it now because I feel like I should duck. No, I'm just kidding. I love that. I know my attachment wounds often show up as I go through these periods of time where I need more assurance than feels reasonable or in touch with what's going on.
Yeah.
Day to day in the moment.
Well, definitely with this rupture in a relationship. And man, I really, you and I have talked in depth about this process, and I'm not ready to talk about it, but I really kept trying. I really kept going back in there and trying. And then it just became very clear that this is not working. It's not good for me. It's really activating my nervous system in ways that are not healthy, and made a decision to end a relationship. But as a consequence of that, I feel like I've spread my needs out amongst a number of people, and they're kind of dropping like flies right now. I mean, this is the only relationship that I'm having conflict in, but one relationship, somebody's going through something and they've pulled back. In another relationship, I don't even know what's going on, but it's been well over, I think it's going on almost 2 months since we've really connected, and we normally connect a couple times a week, or at least weekly or every couple of weeks. Again, these things are fine, but it's a shift. And what happened is, and I cried to you about, like, you're the only one, I'm just going to be too much. That sense of neediness came up for me, which is a recurring theme. And what I have to say is I'm really good about reaching out and creating new connections. And I found some beautiful connections of some therapists that have also been diagnosed as autistic that specialized in working with HSPs. If I keep saying this every week, I just don't remember what we talk about. But it has been so validating, and we're going to do a Zoom call tomorrow. And so I want to be very clear that when I talk about the things that have been hard, I've also been really blessed and held in some beautiful ways with creating, I think, a closer circle of people that are a better fit for me. And part of what you and I have been talking about is, you have people that are in your inner circle, your medium circle, and your outer circle. And I don't think I've been very good at differentiating. And I think many of us that are neurodivergent, we meet people, we connect, and we kind of overshare. But if we're meeting someone who's very similar, sometimes that really works. And I don't think I've been able to discriminate in some cases about where does somebody fit in that circle? How much do I share? What do I share? And really trying to work hard to understand that, because I don't think I want to go through this again.
Yeah. And it's not only just what you share, because as far as sharing goes, like, you share a lot and you share, on a podcast. It's very public. Yeah. Right. And I love that about you, that vulnerability and authenticity. And I know many people benefit from it. I love it when we get emails. It's so sweet. I think it's also knowing or feeling into like what your expectations are from that relationship. And one thing that I love that I think both of us have been working on and reminding each other of is that there doesn't have to be judgment in any of this, right? As you're just noticing what is very natural. Like I try to remind myself that boundaries are natural. A line of trees is a boundary, or a ridge or a river. And that sometimes it is about time boundaries, if someone has some, or energy boundaries or emotional bandwidth boundaries, or all kinds of different boundaries. So the checking in and then the seeing the natural boundary and not making ourselves or anybody else wrong about this. So right before we hop on, I have my self-compassion group every week. And so having compassion for both people, multiple people, multiple sides, having compassion just for life itself and all of its dips and turns and highs and lows.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I have two very separate responses to you. One of them is it's interesting that, yes, I'm vulnerable in my life if you know me personally. And there's this way that I show up for the podcast that you listeners are out there. I don't know who most of you are. Some of my clients listen, some of the people in group listen. But I feel like those are people that I know. I went to a retirement party on Saturday, and one of the guys there, we have a neighborhood get together, so we celebrate all kinds of things. And one of the guys there said, I listen to your podcast. It kind of felt like, ooh, that's a little close to home.
Yeah.
And it was funny because you called me when I was there. And so when you and I got off the phone, I'm like, Jen, my co-host, that was her on the phone. And he got really excited. And some of the people that go to Aquafit know about the podcast because I have stickers on my car that say the podcast. And then when they are close and then they distance, sometimes I wonder if I'm maybe not a good fit. Not that there's anything wrong with me, but if you're not wired the way that you and I are, the way the listeners are, this is a lot. If you're somebody who does not process deeply and doesn't notice a lot of things, this can be a lot. And it's okay that I'm not everybody's person, but there is this crossover to speaking to you, the listeners, to the person that is next to me in the pool and doesn't seem to be talking to me a whole bunch anymore. Not that I walk around going like, I have a podcast, but it's a very interesting thing. And I was talking with a client yesterday who is a writer, and she also has that same thing that she shares very vulnerably in her writing. But sometimes the people that are close to her don't have that information, or if they do, then it feels like, ooh, that's kind of a lot.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting because, here on the podcast, like you show up, and as far as people in our lives, like we socially construct each other in our heads. And the podcast, I don't know, I just think it's such an interesting way to receive information about somebody.
Yeah. And then the other part that's unrelated is boundaries. And I often talk with clients that are so concerned about setting boundaries, but I usually ask them, how do you feel when somebody sets a boundary with you? And when somebody sets a boundary with me, provided it's done skillfully, I really want to honor people's boundaries. And I appreciate knowing where the limits are and what works for them and what doesn't. That to me gives me a sense of security. But often we have this sense that setting boundaries is mean, it's harsh, it's unkind. And if I set a boundary with someone and they're not able to honor that boundary, or they give me pushback, or their perception is that I'm acting a certain way or creating something that I'm not, that's also really good information about how people are able to honor and respect boundaries. And boundaries are really to create safety and more intimacy as opposed to distance in general. Not always, but in general, provided it's not a toxic, harmful relationship.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think we're all kind of, I know, I'll just speak for myself, not having grown up encouraged to check in with what my boundaries are, to check in with when your body will give you a really clear signal if you're checked in, like when you're a no. And often when I do boundary work, I frame it as like, what do you need in place to be a heck yes? For being able to show up for someone or something, or to include something else in your life. And it's about really respecting our limitations. And limitations, it's a natural boundary. Like your body needs so much sleep and water and food.
Right.
Those, like if we expand what we think of as boundaries, and that it isn't this, here's my fence, don't you cross it. And the other thing is that boundaries aren't about changing other people's behavior, right? It's about how we're able to show up.
Mm-hmm.
So I love, love, love boundary work. I would say it definitely, and it's so important. It's so pervasive. Every single relationship in our lives, including our relationships with ourselves. Think about the inner boundary as for me, so going through something, and then having to say no to someone I love who isn't respecting boundaries at all.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if there's an opposite word for that, maybe it's entitlement,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just so my inner boundary was like, okay, I make meaning. We all do. We all make meaning. So one of the meanings that I make out of having this boundary is that either I'm unkind or it goes against my values of kindness and compassion. And usually that likes to feel good. That's another thing to consider, is that sometimes the most compassionate thing to do is to have the boundary. Mm-hmm. It's not all or nothing like that. So the inner boundary was like, this is not that. Mm-hmm. This is reflective of the situation that I'm in with this person right now, mm-hmm. and not just a reflection of like in some abstract way of like the whole of me.
Right.
Sometimes we'll talk about it as keeping ourselves in context, mm-hmm. right? Not decontextualizing ourselves. So that's an inner boundary that I feel like is really important.
Yeah.
So yeah, boundaries are always coming up.
Absolutely. It's not uncommon when we set boundaries that we feel dysregulated, we feel guilty, we feel dysregulated, and that's okay, that sometimes that's still part of the process. And I think that the idea is if we set a boundary, we'll feel happy, joyous, and free. And the more we do it, the more we know that we can manage it, and we have tools to manage that dysregulation. And sometimes it means, through this thing that I went through for a period of a few weeks, I checked in really closely with you because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't being reactive. And when you talk about how do we see ourselves in context, for me, it was very important. I'm embarrassed to admit this, and it's true for me. There's a part of me that can just go, okay, that's it, I'm done, and I want to walk away. I feel like I don't think I've done that, but internally there's a part of me that can just say, I've had it and I'm done. And because that part scares me, I probably stayed in this relationship through this conflict longer than I needed to. And the reason why I needed to do that was I needed to show myself that I don't just walk away, and I really do try and work it out. And I tried to work through some of these really hard things, and it just didn't work. And I think you and I have talked about this over the past few episodes because this has been ongoing. When do you share what your truth is, and when do you just let it be okay that there are some differences, and how do you not let that build up so that you have an explosion or a rupture, which is not really what happened in this case. And once I got to that point where there was this big rupture and I didn't know what to do, I really started speaking my truth and was okay with that, because at that point, whatever happened with the relationship was okay with me. But really looking at how can I show up more authentically moving forward in other relationships. And I'm still trying to figure this one out. I think this is what we said in the last episode too.
Well, it's it's bringing me back to, if we want real intimacy, right? Intimacy. And we're going to challenge ourselves to be really vulnerable and authentic in our relationships so that our relationships can be closer and more vibrant. It's that risk taking. Like, you have to be willing to risk the loss of the relationship. And hopefully you don't. And if that's too threatening to your self-concept, that loss of a relationship, and you're not going to take those risks when those risks are so important to be able to really share space and life and understanding with people.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I've found coming through this is, while this relationship has moved out of my life, what's coming in are closer relationships. At least we'll see. They're new, so they may not last. It may not be sustainable. I don't know. But I can tell you that the two new relationships that have moved in feel so yummy, and I feel so seen, and I think the other people feel seen, and it is such a different quality. And I think many of us that didn't grow up getting reflected and haven't felt seen and heard, that if we find people that tolerate us, and then we find people that accept us, and then we find people that are kind to us, and then we find people that have things to offer us but may not have the skill set that we need, that I honestly think that for me, I really was not looking at what are the primary things that I need to have in a relationship, and just fell into this relationship over a number of years. And sometimes we don't know that somebody very close to me has been in a relationship with somebody for 20 years, and they've just started bumping up against some things that there's no way that they could have known in the beginning. So I don't think that we can always predict, prevent. We just don't always know, because sometimes we grow, other people grow, circumstances change. I think COVID has changed a lot. Politically, things have changed a lot. And now that people are having very strong feelings about human rights, if we have people in our circle that can't support that, that's creating changes in relationships. I mean, there are all kinds of factors, and I don't think that we can always anticipate and predict and prevent.
No, that's where I really wish we would just accept that it's as natural as a path suddenly breaking into two. And a lot of things that I hear from people will be this thought that if you get to, let's say it's 15 years, 20 years, oh, does this mean that all of that was a lie?
Mm-hmm.
Or all of that wasn't true? And I don't think so at all. It's just where you were at.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're growing and changing, which hopefully you are, because as far as I know, complete stillness is death, right? That you can still honor. Like, I've been divorced, and I am so proud of the 19 years that I had with that person, and how we functioned and what we did. And then it became time, and that's the cluing in and the checking in. And it's heartbreaking. Sometimes you have to break your own heart, but that it's natural, and that it doesn't mean that anyone's done anything wrong. It's just that suddenly you find yourselves on just very different wavelengths, and the relationship is still there. In this case that I'm talking about, right? With, we co-parent together, we do it very well. It's possible, but I think a lot of what makes that possible is that there isn't this foot stomping. This shouldn't happen. This shouldn't be allowed. Someone has to be the bad guy. That needs to go.
Yeah. I can remember when I divorced my first husband, feeling so confused that this was the person that I went to for comfort and for security. This was my soft place to fall, and now he wasn't. And how incredibly confusing that felt to me, making that shift, and how difficult that was. And it did not work for us to remain friends. I wanted to, and he felt very hurt and betrayed by me, which I'm okay with. So all relationships are going to be different. But I also think that then there's also grief around even the rituals, the times that you shared together, the things that you did, and allowing that grief to be there, and then creating space for new people, new rituals, new things. But in that in-between place, even if you're setting a boundary, I think there's often, euphoric recall is one of them, where you think about the best parts of the relationship and you forget the things that were problematic. And then just the actual tangible things that you don't have or share with that person, or you see something that you'd send a picture, or you'd call the person, or you'd buy it for them, and you don't have that. So there is a lot that gets stirred up when we have ruptures in relationships. We set boundaries, there's loss, there's change. These are all just natural things that happen.
Yeah. And how to be with that, with spaciousness and grace. And again, not this idea that it shouldn't happen. Right. But just a lot of acceptance.
Yeah. I think too that, I don't know if this is true for men, but I think there's this message that women get that we're supposed to make friends with people and be friends for forever. And for people that have been friends for years and years and years, it does feel really nice. And I don't think there's a lot talked about that it's okay that we have people that come into our lives and they go out of our lives, and people are here for seasons and for certain times. But I think that we tend to do this thing where we look at people that have had friends for years and years, and we think that what's wrong with us, and why don't we have that? And some of the long-term relationships that I have, we've gone in and out of it being hot and cold, and even being married. I think this year's 26 years that we've had seasons where we're not unpleasant to each other, but it doesn't feel warm and fuzzy. We coexist, we share space, and times when we're very connected and it feels just amazing. And I think that's just the nature of relationships and growing and changing and moving through all of our stuff, that it's not this constant high level, warm, fuzzy connection with a fight here and there, and then going back to this very intensity that most people can't maintain that.
Yeah. I, had a pretty sad rupture not too long ago. And one of the things that really kept it a rupture, made it hard to repair, was trying to re-engage and then having this, it's like, okay, here I am, I'm showing up. And it's like, well, why haven't you been here? Why haven't you shown up? Like, but I'm here right now trying to show up, and it's really, I think it is some of that mythology that creates blocks to what could be there, is there.
Yeah.
And it is really, in that case, I was just really sad about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that bumps up against my internal dialogue of, am I ever going to be happy? And is it ever going to be enough? Because I can have that connection. And I think because of that internal disconnection and existential loneliness that I have, I'm okay with the existential loneliness. It's just that we're born alone, we die alone. That's the part that I don't like. But what often comes up for me is like, Patricia, what else are you going to want? Like, is anything ever going to be enough for you? And knowing that my thoughts and feelings and what I want is fine to ask and talk about. I may not get it, but that doesn't mean that I'm being demanding. And I think, again, if we look at how you talk about things being in context, that if I'm bumping up against somebody who doesn't have a lot of resources, doesn't have a lot to give, then I probably am going to receive that message. And so I bring that to my relationship with you, but I don't get that reflected from you. So we internalize these wounds and we assume that that's what we're going to bump against in every relationship. And it's our history, and it may or may not be accurate in the current moment.
Yeah. It's that projection, right? Projecting our expectations out there.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, I am totally willing to revisit Born Alone and Die Alone.
It's a construct that works for you. And maybe I need to be friendly with it. I don't know. I don't think I want to die alone, though.
No, I don't think I don't know. Like, who knows, right? I think I just want to be ready for anything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny, as you said that just now, I was like, wait a minute, that's not true. My children, I was there when my kids were born in quite a prominent way.
I had lots of people in my delivery room when my twins were born. A whole team, a whole double team.
Right?
Yeah.
It's funny because, I've been a meditator for a long time, and meditation, as I was taught it, and the tradition that I come from, the whole point of it was to have a good death.
Mm-hmm.
And to get to that moment with all of its uncertainty and not freak out,
mm-hmm.
to be able to stay curious and observant and meet those moments without freaking out. And that has been really helpful, because there's so many mini moments in life that we might just freak out about,
mm-hmm.
That instead, if we can kind of ground ourselves, and in that way, I mean the aloneness, right? Because there's nobody up here in my head or in my heart exactly with me, but I can certainly feel the connection.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's like a thing where both are true.
Yeah. Well, I know this week I was feeling incredibly needy and disconnected, but I had great connection and was still feeling that, I think, that existential loneliness. And then yesterday I just felt incredibly grateful and connected, and nothing had happened or nothing had changed, but I think allowing for that space and to talk about it. And I can even feel lonely while I'm connected and appreciate the connection. I mean, all of those things can exist in the same realm. And knowing that this is just a moment, that this is not what the reality is. And I think that's challenging when we go through hard times, that it feels like this is the only thing that's ever going to exist. It's always going to be this way. And knowing that this is a moment and there will be other moments.
Yes. Beautifully said.
Yeah. Jen has to go. And so the two of us gesture to each other that it's time to wrap it up.
I love it. That's so funny.
Anything before we wrap up, Jen?
No, lots of love for you, my friend.
You too. All right. Have a great day. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye. Hey again. So I'm curious to know, did that resonate for you? Do you struggle with friendships? I hear a lot of people talking about just not having people that are like them in their lives, not having close friendships, wanting to have connections like Jen and I have. I'm not saying that's true for all of you, but I hear this very frequently of people just wondering, where do I find my people? If you struggle with any of these things and you want to work with either Jen or me, you can reach out to Jen at heartfulnessconsulting.com. You can go to my website at unapologeticallysensitive.com. I've got a sheet that you can fill out there that gives me the information that helps me. If you do reach out to me, please check your spam because I think my email response often goes into spam. The next online HSP course is going to start in September 11th through November 20th. Registration is going to start mid-August. But if you're looking to find your people, as HSPs, we show up differently. We have these similarities, and there's still so much variation amongst us. I just finished an online HSP course. The group decided to extend an extra 5 weeks, and we did that. And they're going to continue to meet on their own. I obviously can't guarantee who's going to be in the group. I am making the group smaller, so there'll only be 8 members per group. This last one, I think we only had 5 or 6, and it really was lovely. I never know how many people are going to show up, but if you're longing for that sense of connection, you want to know more about what it's like to be an HSP, you want to learn more about embracing your emotions and communicating, creating a lifestyle that honors you, boundaries, perfectionism, you can go to my website at unapologeticallysensitive.com, and there's an HSP groups page to learn more about it. I would love to support you, would love to help you find your community. And I'm constantly thinking about how do I create spaces for HSPs or neurodivergent folks to connect and find other people? Because I just constantly am seeing that people just want to find people that get them. I think that's all I have to say. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. You have a right to set boundaries. You have a right to have rupture. You have a right to have repair. You have a right to say what is true for you. You have a right to be dysregulated. You have a right to take up space. It's okay if people don't like you. It's okay if people don't get you. It's okay to find the people that really do get you and to really pull those people in closely. I think that's all I have. Hope you have a blessed day. Bye-bye.